I think I did too.
lot
In
of
fact, I
stuff.
know I did. There he is.
I thank you all for your
Okay.
patience.
Ready? Yep, ready to go. Yeah, he's got- Oh, good. Okay. I'm going to call the meeting to order. If you'll all rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, administration, 3.1. Go on.
Item 3.1, International and Uniform Building Codes, 3.1A, first reading ordinance number 16-10872. 3.1B, to declare a compelling public purpose exists to allow second reading on the same day. And 3.1C, second reading ordinance number 16-10872.
Okay, Mr. Mike.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. You called this special meeting in response to a request to revisit the effective date of our code adoption, and that is the primary topic of this action item. But there was quite a bit of discussion that kind of related to ancillary items as it affected code adoption and how staff communicated that. So I want to touch on that and just try to resolve any confusion that might have come out of that conversation as I give my report. But the main point is on October 3rd of 2016, you adopted 7 different ordinances that adopted the entire body of codes that would serve as the city's codes going forward. That was the result of numerous meetings conducted on the part of the building official, Jim Brown, and quite a bit of collaboration with both the development community and the building advisory board. And that adoption set an effective date basically 90 days out. I think the 3rd to the 1st is technically 87 days, but 90 days out from your adoption was to be the effective date of the new codes. Following that adoption, staff took kind of our past practice of communicating that adoption and effective date to the development community. We did that using the Building Advisory Board email list that users can self-subscribe on our website and receive notices from us. We did it through the continuing education that was conducted by Mr. Brown in the Development Services Department. Broadcast emails to that web server list, the Development Services newsletter, and then we communicated it in DRT meetings as we met with projects. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. So last week, Don Mars with DMA Architects approached you in the Citizens Forum portion of the meeting and expressed concern about the effective date. He mentioned that in the DRT meeting, specifically with the KU School of Medicine, there was conversation about the codes and that they were working diligently and working very hard to complete that design by the end of the year, but they were concerned about missing something in their haste to complete that project. And he also noted that complex projects can take far longer than 90 days to design, and so maybe our 90-day effective date may not be appropriate. And I would note that there are plenty of examples of projects that have been under design well longer than 90 days, so that's something to consider as we go forward. Then there was quite a bit of discussion about how codes are adopted and administered, and I just want to make sure that I don't know that I fully responded or gave enough description at that time, and I want to make sure that we're clear. So one of the examples that Mr. Mars gave was his Marymount project starting under the 2003 codes, and it became apparent to me after the meeting that may have left the impression with some people that the 2003 codes were continuously applied to that project for the life of the project, and that's not the case in terms of the way we administer the codes. There is a provision for existing buildings in the codes, and what it does not expect that upon a code adoption, everything has to be brought up to code to the newest, most recently adopted code. So, for example, whatever code cycle you adopt does not mean that existing buildings have to be altered or renovated to meet the code, nor does it mean that any future project involves the entire building and it has to be brought up to code. Rather, any systems that are altered, and for example, let's say that an HVAC system is altered, then that alteration needs to meet the code. And that can be a discretionary item or a conversation that the building official has to get involved with. But I think if you look at it in the condo perspective, a condo that was built in 2003 can remain compliant with the 2003 codes as long as it's not altered. A subsequent condo that's renovated and remodeled under a new set of codes needs to meet that new set of codes. So I just want to be clear that we don't, over time, administer multiple sets of codes trying to figure out when a project was initiated. Mr. Mars also indicated that in our DRT meeting, the effective date had not been communicated. And frankly, I tried to go back and look at the DRT meeting minutes or notes as our meeting was going on, because I just found it hard to believe that we did not communicate that, but I couldn't say for sure that we hadn't missed it. And I couldn't find it in the DRT meeting notes as I was looking at them as the conversation went on. So I went back and listened to the recording, and I think I figured out what happened in that as that DRT meeting went on, I paused the conversation and said, let's talk about the timing of the building permit a minute. And it started with the timing relative to design review board review, because there's an application process and that takes time, and we're trying to figure out how all this was going to work. Before moving the conversation on to the January 1st effective date, one of Mr. Mars' team members kind of jokingly pointed out that, well, Mr. Mars explained the status of the project, that it was under demolition as we spoke. That should be completed. Construction should begin shortly after the first of the year, and that they plan to submit plans by the end of the year. And a team member of Mr. Mars kind of jokingly indicated by 4:59 on December 30th that we've already talked about this. And I had known from Mr. Brown that they'd had ongoing conversations about the effective date and preparing their plans relative to the effective date. So didn't belabor that point. We didn't specifically confirm that January 1st was the effective date, but assumed that from the conversation they were aware of it. Now, having said that, after that meeting, we received an additional request for an altered effective date. So from a staff's perspective, we probably should have anticipated that the ability to meet that December 30 deadline was in question, and that was the reason for the subsequent request for a revised effective date. So we didn't belabor the point of the effective date, but I thought we had covered it, or at least that they were aware of it in that context. So we prepared the attached ordinances, and I want to point out one thing. Mr. Mars, in the conversation with you last week, as well as email since then, proposed that DRT meetings be kind of the starting point of qualifying for some revised effective date or extended effective date for projects. And I understand the reasoning for that, but as staff talked about it, it raises some practical difficulties. For example, the current set of codes has been in effect for over 6 years, so theoretically we would need to monitor those 6 years of DRT projects until we transferred to another set of codes. Mr. Mars did indicate some type of time frame, but we have quite a few DRT meetings. We pride ourselves on not requiring that they be at some high level of design. Frankly, we've had meetings with people that didn't have a location identified, really didn't have much of a project identified. We've had meetings without any design professionals involved, literally hand-drawn sketches on spiral notebook paper. And we think that's good customer service, but I don't know that any form of a DRT meeting is practical to be a starting point for a revised effective date. And then lastly, we did have some concern that as you approach the effective date, there might be motivation to get in under the wire with a DRT meeting that might not otherwise be needed or requested, just to kind of punch that ticket and qualify the project for that revised effective date. I did say lastly, but I guess I do have one other point to that as well. The other concern is, and you talked about a project hypothetically on South 9th Street, and it transitions to another location or it morphs, and then we end up having to have conversations about, is that the same DRT that we had however long ago? Does it still qualify? So rather than take the DRT meeting approach, what we tried to do is provide some criteria by which if you reach this status prior to the effective date, you qualify for application of the existing codes throughout the life of the project. And I should say, too, our past approach and our intended approach was that if we had some form of phased building permit, with the exception of a demolition permit, prior to the effective date of the code adoption, then our intended application was that we would honor that 2006 code cycle for the life of that project. So what we've done by way of ordinance is codify that and be more clear in terms of how that might be administered. So what we've done, and it might be helpful just to go to the actual code language, but we've revised the effective date from January 1st to April 1st, and then we've said that a project shall be considered to have been initiated upon the application for a building permit for a footing and foundation, shell construction, white box construction, which is kind of the rough interior construction, tenant finish, or any combination of the above. So some projects it'll be a full set of plans, start to finish. Others may be in those phases. If any permit is submitted for any of those phases prior to the effective date, our intention would be that it's under the 2006 codes, and it remains under the 2006 codes for the life of that project, with a couple of qualifiers. One is that construction commences within 90 days from the initial application, and that the permits may remain active and construction is continuous over the life of the project, so we don't have some sizable delay. Now, I should tell you, by just the way the code is written, permits are good for 180 days and they can be extended. So, if you look at that phasing, pull a footing and foundation permit, commence construction, that takes 180 days, transition into the next permit. That's potentially 4 times 180 before the entire project is completed, but at least it's demonstrating continuous progress. So that's kind of the substantive part of the code amendments. The remainder is amending the previous effective dates in each one of the codes and providing a code summary for publication purposes. But in response to Mr. Marr's request of you, we prepared one ordinance amending the effective dates in the other 7 ordinances and specifying that if a building permit in one of those 4 phases is pulled prior to April 1st, and may proceed under the 2006 codes and may continue to proceed under the 2006 codes for the remaining phases, provided that it commences construction in 90 days and maintains an active building permit over the life of the project. So I think that's a quick overview of it, but I'd be more than happy to answer questions.
Have we had any other complaints about the process at all?
That's a really good question. I can't say that we've had complaints. What I can tell you is we have a handful of projects that were very aware of the January 1st effective date and made very deliberate plans accordingly, either to expedite their plan preparation before January 1 or recognizing they couldn't make January 1 and designed to the 2012 codes on the expectation that it would be effective January 1st.
Okay.
So our intention, assuming this ordinance passes, our intention would be to broadcast email this change out to everyone and be very specific in contacting the projects we're aware of that are on the bubble.
Okay.
Has that process already started? I got an email yesterday from Sue Klein. Is that something to let contractors know that?
The
So
main
maybe a
reason
step
for
ahead of
the
us. I'm
email
not entirely
yesterday
sure.
was to inform everybody that the meeting would be held this morning, and there was a possibility of this happening with a delayed implementation date.
But there was detailed information as to what those changes may be, so that if people wanted to be here, they.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Mhm. Actually, we've completed 3 different emails since the last meeting, just to make sure people were aware of what was going on
Right.
this morning.
Okay. And has there been any response to any of those?
Now, we do know that there was a DRT meeting, or not a DRT meeting, a meeting with the Planning Commission a week and a half ago, and there's a project on North Ohio, that is on the bubble of whether or not they submit next couple days or whether they wait until this new deadline gets completed. So
Okay.
And not
They
to
are
put them on the
anxious.
spot, but I do see one new face in the audience that I suspect may be here as a result of that
Okay.
communication. I don't know.
All right.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Morris, do you have any comment?
Madam Mayor, Commissioners, good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask some questions or point out some issues here. Mr. Scragg's comments about the DRT meeting and my suggestion that they use the DRT meeting as a point of beginning of a project or of the permit process. He failed to point out to you that they do have an application form that you have to fill out for the DRT meeting. And it is very detailed, and in the case of the majority of our projects, we're not in just scratching for information. We actually have a fully completed, we know where the building's being built, we have a survey, we have a site plan, we have everything except, or we have everything in reference to what the codes require of that buildings. And so we're there looking, trying to make sure that we understand how the codes are going to be applied so we can complete our construction drawings. That's exactly what we did on the KU project, so we could move forward. It's my opinion that because of that detailed request that you can make, you could have that as a beginning point. Could also have a DRT meeting where you just go in and discuss where you're starting. But in our case, and this may only occur every 6 years as code cycles change, and you're never going to know exactly how it affects the projects that are in the process amongst architects from all over the country that may be working in Salina, Kansas, as to how your effective date affects them. But I think that this modification to the ordinance is acceptable. It does give the additional time to extend out the dates, and I think that it'll help the projects that I'm working on and that I had concerns with. We do have cases for instance, on school buildings and school facilities where schools are allowed to be dealt with under the code they were constructed under when you're dealing with modifications and you're dealing with changes in them. And so there are issues that you do go back and refer to the prior code and how it was enforced and how it was dealt with. They don't just go away. They're there for perpetuity of the building, basically. And so it's not a matter of do they stay or do you have to move. The old codes are still there, and we still have to refer to them quite often. And I think that may have been a little misleading on his part in what he stated, so I wanted you to be aware of that. Any questions you might have of me?
I just have a quick one. I mean, and I appreciate staff's report, and I didn't find any of it misleading. But let me ask you this. When was the first, I mean, we're having a special meeting here today because we want to try and get this done by the end of the year. This thing was passed back in October 3rd of this year. Now, you state that clearly isn't enough time for any of this to happen. Why didn't you come to us on October 3rd?
You know, the best time to have come here would have been
Well, when you
then,
thought that 3 months wasn't enough time, I mean, was that because your project now is at its deadline and you're not done, or because 3 months is not enough time?
because 3 months is not enough
Then
time.
why weren't you here on October 3rd? You were part of the committee that put together this whole thing for the last 2 years. I mean, you're telling us that staff is misleading us, yet you're telling us that all of a sudden 3 months is not enough time.
I think you have to look and deal with the projects that are being worked on and how long it takes to put things together, depending on how those projects relate. I'm working on a project that we've been working way over 6 months on the schematic design, trying to get it completed, trying to get all of the players lined up. And there's a lot of detail that goes into making that happen. I don't make it my job to specifically keep track of how your ordinances are put out and what ordinances you pass. I did at one point in time when I was sitting in your seat, but I don't do that anymore. I don't have time for that. So,
Well,
we obviously
had time to come here for a special meeting.
had I been aware of the fact that, 3 months is not going to work, we should really look at this. I really looked at it from the perspective, and I stated this at the meeting last week. We had our DRT meeting. We had the codes in place. I felt like we were moving forward and that there was no question as to whether or not they were going to accept the plans under the 2006, because that's how the DRT meeting was defined. And when I found out and asked the question of the building official and got the answer back, he told me, that's a good question. Well, let me check. City manager's office said, no, that's not how it's going to happen. That's why I requested this to be changed. Mr. Gage told me the morning of your meeting last week, well, he said, we can look at this and take this into consideration, or you can come to Citizens Forum and present this and see where it goes. And so I did, to get the extension pushed out there, not only for this one project, but for several other projects that I'm working on. So it's not just one. So I had an understanding that I was corrected on, and so that's why I came at the last minute, because I felt like we left that DRT meeting and we had everything in place. I got the report. The report said everything was in order, and I felt like we were moving forward. Our goal was to, our schedule is to meet the submission deadline of Thursday of this week. We're compiling all that information. My staff is as I'm here. I think we may be able to meet that deadline. Now, will everything we turn in be accepted? Will we have everything that's required to satisfy that permit application on this detailed project? And will we know that? We won't know that until staff has done their review. And that'll be after January 1. So the safe thing for me to do was to come here. Yes, it was at the last minute, but that was the safe thing for me to do in order to secure the things that we had been working on based on how I understood things were happening. And I hope that helps you understand where I come from.
That does help, but what doesn't help is the fact that when you come in here on the public forum and then today and making statements like what staff is saying is misleading, is that you came in here with the argument being that you weren't given enough time, that staff misled you on different dates and the DRTs ought to be a certain way and everything. And simply, you could have came in with the request that, hey, I'd appreciate more time on this thing, but you came in. Here's part of the problem is that I have no intention of voting against this today because, you know what, I'd like to see your client move on with this project, and I don't want to penalize them for any reason. But there seems to be a pattern in this community of when a designer or a contractor gets behind on something with their client, that the easiest person to blame is the city. And I got to tell you something, the city works diligently. I read that blue sheet. I thought it was very well done. I appreciate the fact that you guys record and well document those DRT processes, because although some of them may be sketch projects, and I've seen a lot of them that are sketch projects, and I think it's probably very appreciated when folks like yourself come in with very detailed projects. It makes their job a lot easier. But the problem is that the DRT process covers a whole range of things, and quite frankly, I found that maybe the comment of saying, hey, it's going to be 459 on January or December 30th was to mean that you guys fully expected to have everything done. So I think the city is extremely accommodating. I mean, the fact that we're having this meeting today is evidence of that. But we seem to, at the city, get the rap of, boy, the city doesn't want to work with anybody. The city makes it harder. And quite frankly, I think if you want to have the DRT process be the trigger for having all that put into place, there's going to have to be a whole lot more written into regulations about what the DRT process is. And I think it makes it harder and steps back from what we're trying to accomplish with the DRT process. And so that in and of itself is, I appreciate not having that in there. But I guess what gets under my skin a little bit is the fact that the city seems to be the first place that people go to blame. And it's easy for people to kind of fall behind on something and tell their client, hey, it's because the city has done that. And that's just kind of what it seemed like here. I mean, from what it was. If that isn't what you're coming in and doing it, then that's great. I intend to vote in favor of this. Benefit of the doubt, I guess you'd say, and also the fact that I don't wish to harm your client by thinking that, okay, this is not something that is only, it seems to be only for one project or one person. And I'm fine with that because it sounds like everybody else was willing and able to comply. So,
Commissioner, you're indicating that I'm blaming the city and I'm playing the blame game.
Yeah.
I am not, and I have not. I came in here, I have sat there.
that's what it sounded like
DRT.
last Monday when we were sitting here.
No, I was
Say
not
so.
blaming city. I asked questions of the city. I asked how this process worked, and they said, no, it doesn't work that way. What are my options? I used the options. I am not in the process of blaming the city or blaming the whole process of DRT. I've been involved in that creation of that and how that's evolved. I'm probably one of the biggest supporters of the process and what has actually happened and has changed in Salina, because I've been through the process where city staff did beat up on the building community and they fought back. And now I think we've got a good process in place. We have people that are willing to listen and to understand where you're headed and where you're going. That's why we're here this morning. There was no intention, if you picked up that I was blaming city staff. That's not true. That's not true at all, and I'm not going to take that. You beat up on me several times in front of this podium on various occasions in the past, and that's not necessary. It's not necessary from you as a commissioner. It's not necessary from anybody. If we're going to work in this community together, we have to work together. So drop the blame, drop the guilt, drop the finger pointing. I think everybody will be better off.
Mr. Mars, will the April 1st date on the new ordinance be all right for you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It will help
Good.
several projects that I'm working on. It won't help the KU project because I believe we're going to be ahead of the deadline as we had planned. But I appreciate your time. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Just had one quick clarification. For the schools, if the school is 50 years old and it's being changed, I'm assuming any common sense upgrades would have to occur or safety upgrades?
Frankly, my understanding of the code doesn't necessarily correspond with Mr. Mars's description, and I don't want to mislead you further, so I'd like to ask Mr. Brown to speak to that.
Didn't mean to belabor this, but I was just wanted to get that cleared up before or someone else left the meeting not knowing.
Mayor, Commissioners, good morning.
Mr. Brown?
As opposed to our good afternoon meetings typically. As it relates to the schools, and I've explained, when the school projects came in, they came in as a total package. So, for instance, Central High School has 14 to 17 phases. Each phase must be completed. Basically, you're relocating students from one point to another point so you can continue with the improvements and the additions for the other portions of the school. It's continually evolving. So that entire package, when it was submitted, was reviewed under our current codes. That project will remain under our current codes throughout its fruition because it's continuously moving. There is progress being made continuously. There will be no change in codes. For instance, South High School, end date of 2018, it will still be under 2006 throughout the whole entirety of this project without changing to a different code body. And that's the way we do multi-phase projects. It's the fair way to do multi-phase projects.
So, and that's consistent with my understanding and my description in the staff report. And I may not get it right, Mr. Mars, and you're welcome to correct me if I don't, but my understanding of Mr. Mars's description is that using Central High School as an example of an elderly building, we may apply codes prior to 2006 based on the date that the building or a portion of the building was constructed. Can you speak to that?
If, for a building that, whatever body of code it is, if it was submitted under a certain code body, whatever project it is, if it's a multi-phase project and it takes years and years and years to complete the project, that body of code is going to be tied to that project throughout the entire body of the code, throughout the entire process of the construction and completion. Now, upon completion, say 2 years from now, we get another bond issue. Well, of course, that portion will be under the new code. Or whatever the project was, upon its completion, under the set of codes that it was approved on, it will remain under that until its completion. And if there's an addition later or modification later, then it will become or fall under the body of the codes that is current. Where the code doesn't penalize a project that's coming in that's a multi-phase stage. So basically, if we come in and it is a footing foundation, whatever, if a portion of that is submitted, saying yes, we need to get going with this, we're going to have 3 phases with this. Phase 1 needs to occur immediately. Phase 1 ties that project from beginning to end, as long as work continues. Now, say there's a lapse of time. I do the footing foundations, then something occurs, or 90 days or 180 days, I haven't done anything. That chapter closes at that point. The building code closes that chapter. So then we have to revisit and look at putting that project under a new body of codes.
I guess if I rephrase my question, it's going to sound crazy, but nothing in this current school project is being built to the 1950 codes.
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure. Okay.
Not.
I'm not quite sure what the 1950 codes were.
Well, that's when the school was originally
And as one additional clarification relative to the effective date, our intention previously was, and the way that we drafted this ordinance to codify it further, is if an application is received before the effective date, it's under the codes, regardless of whether there are review comments and alterations that have to be made after the effective date, whether that's January 1 or April 1st. Now, I would admit, I should say, as it relates to DRT meetings, Mr. Mars and his firm and his projects are on the far extreme end of the professional and prepared spectrum. And so they're not what I'm thinking about when we're trying to account for all the possibilities. But there are certainly other instances on occasion where we get applications for building permits that are so inadequate that we don't check them in. And they might not qualify. But as we approach that date, anything that represents a best effort, our intention would be to apply the code under which they applied. They don't have to be finalized and have a permit issued.
To add to that, Commissioners, the DRT, right now we're talking about a code context, a building code context, but there's a lot more to that. The DRT approach is a pre-submittal context, typically. And as Mike mentioned, it can be very conceptual. It doesn't have to be to the degree that Mr. Mars was describing. It's great when it is, to be honest with you, but it doesn't have to be. It can be very conceptual at that point in time. And what we're talking about, it could be, we'll cover a lot of topics. We cover building code, subdivision, zoning, floodplains, utilities, other public infrastructure, and on and on and on. So it's a way to wrap your arms around all the big questions that could affect your project, not just the building codes. And it is a pre-discussion, a pre-planning phase. So it would be very, very difficult when you take in consideration all the things that DRT is supposed to help to plan for, to create real effective dates out of that. But that being said, when we looked at the request, we said, okay, does it make sense in the future when we do code adoptions to allow 6-month notice instead of 3? That's fine. I think that works fine. You still may have someone at the end that is going to shoot for it, may not get there, and would we recommend going from 6 to 9? Probably not. But 6 months should give a project the opportunity to really plan and not feel like you just kind of got squeezed at the end. So we're very comfortable with that, which is why we gave you this recommendation for this change, and then we can apply this with future code adoptions without feeling any concern whatsoever. I think it works fine.
Sounds good. Okay. Is there any other public comment? Mr. Morris.
My comment about the use of prior codes for you, Dr. Davis. The state fire marshal several years ago was confronted with trying to implement the 06 code totally across the state. And when school projects came in, he was requiring them to be brought up to that code. And there were a lot of old school buildings in rural areas that do not have fire-rated corridors. They have a lot of glass in the corridors to let borrowed light in. They did not meet the fire ratings on the corridor doors and so forth. The legislature made the state fire marshal go back and review those buildings based on the code they were constructed under as it relates to that life safety feature, and to determine whether or not that was adequate or inadequate. What we have to do on projects such as that is we do a code footprint based on the current code, and then we define the provisions of the building that are non-compliant and why they're non-compliant. And then that gets submitted to the state fire marshal, and they review those buildings based on that aspect. So yes, portions of existing buildings can remain under the code they were constructed under in various conditions based on a review with the architect and the state fire marshal's office. Would you concur, Mr. Brown?
So if no one says anything else about this, I understand it right now. But go ahead.
We honor the authority above us as it relates to the state and the state fire marshal's office, but that is the exception. That's not indicative of how we administer the codes that you're being asked to adopt.
Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Madam Mayor, move approval on first reading ordinance number 16-10872. I can read the complete thing if that's necessary. Thank you.
Have a motion and a second to approve on first reading ordinance number 16-10872. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Okay. And we can declare this a compelling public interest on this particular item. Is that correct?
By motion. You can do
Okay.
that for a second reading
Have a
today.
motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor, declare a compelling public purpose exists to allow second reading on ordinance number 16-10872 on the same day, being today.
Okay.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second to declare a compelling public purpose exists to allow second reading on the same day. Clerk? Roll call? Do we need roll call on this?
This is general.
Okay. Don't need roll call? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign.
Madam Mayor, move approval on second reading ordinance number 16-10872.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for second reading on ordinance number 16-10872. All those in favor say aye.
Now we need-
Oh, we need roll call on this. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
It's okay. Commissioner Blanchard,
Messed up on that.
Aye.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Hardy,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan,
Aye.
Mayor Crawford.
Aye. Okay. Do we have an executive session, I think?
We
We
do.
have Okay.
I move to recess into executive session for 45 minutes to discuss with legal counsel matters subject to the attorney-client privilege for the reason that public discussion of those matters would waive the privilege and adversely affect the city's interest in the matters, and reconvene at 9:30 a.m.
Second.
A motion and a second to convene into executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
Commissioners, we do not
Any
expect you
action?
to come out and take any
Okay.
action.
Thank you. Thank you.